Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my homeowner association sued me because I renovated my house after a flooding destroyed my property. Here is what happened. The title story starts like this. I moved into a new home about 7 years ago and I didn't have a choice in the matter when it came to joining the HOA. I was kind of wary about it but loved the house and wasn't gonna let it stop me from buying it. The HOA seemed to have some dead set ideas about how homes should look that I'll admit I never fully understood. They didn't want homes to be identical, but to follow the right style without ever actually explaining what it meant. What I heard from other people, it really meant that if you wanted to do anything to your home, the HOA had to like it, or they would claim that it didn't fit with the rest of the neighborhood. Another important thing for this story is the area where I am located gets a lot of rain and I am near the coast. It's not a waterfront property, but there still have been some close calls with water. I erred on the side of safety and got myself some good flood insurance just in case there was ever an issue. About 3 years ago, a pretty bad storm raged through and caused total havoc all over the place. At least half the neighborhood had flooding, at least in their basements. Parts of the homes were destroyed, trees went down, it looked like a total disaster. It was the first and only time I ever experienced something like this close up. I called my insurance because my home was flooded very badly. The entire basement was filled and even some of the first floor had water damage. Kitchen couldn't be used obviously, and all electrical and gas had to be shut off for safety. The person I spoke to was an absolute saint who dealt with my panicked and confused mind to give me steps on what to do. First thing was to call a company. He gave me the number to get rid of the water. As you can imagine, they were pretty busy and it took a while for that part to get settled. Then I had an inspector come in to evaluate the damage and tell me what could be fixed and what had to be replaced. He gave me the really bad news that some of the foundation was damaged in the storm and a portion of the home had to be just fully redone. On top of that, all the floors on the first floor and the entire basement needed renovations. It would be a long process and the only good thing was that I had been paying for the insurance this entire time. It wouldn't cover 100%, but what they would give me went a long way. I wasn't even thinking of the HOA when it came to renovating my home. I was too focused on getting myself in a livable space again. Besides, I knew they got involved in new homes being built, but this was just a renovation, so it shouldn't have mattered to them at all, right? Well, I was wrong. I also want to point out that I wasn't really changing anything drastic in the renovation to the outside of my home, only by changing an area that was wood before into brick that I would paint white to match the rest of the home. The big differences in the renovation would be things like more up-to-date foundation and flooring. The house was old and things just don't get made how they were before. The HOA got their hands on the plan somehow and decided to confront me about it. HOA guy: I see that you're planning on putting bricks outside of your house. We did not get any notification or paperwork asking us. Me: I'm renovating from the flood. I need to move kind of fast because of that. Plenty of houses have bricks, so I didn't think it really mattered. HOA: well, it does, because we have a certain style to maintain here. Me: I'm gonna paint it to match the house if that's what you're worried about. HOA: also, these new flooring materials and foundation. This is not what you had before, and you just want to make your house stick out. Me: it's just a modern equivalent, plus nobody will see it. You need to relax seriously and realize that a lot of the homes have water damage and people cannot just sit around and wait for you to decide if you like it or not. The building is within all city codes, so please just leave me alone. I guess they didn't like being spoken to that way because they sued me for my renovation and because of it the entire thing got paused. This was bad because the longer the water damage sits, the more chance for mold to form and spread within the walls. This was not a concern for the HOA and demanded it be paused because I was building supposedly against code. Because of their lies, everything had to sit still until we could go to court and get a ruling on this. That meant I had no electricity, no heating, no gas, no water, no anything. Except of course for a damp home that had an increased chance of mold by the day. I had to go and stay with my mom because it was impossible for me to live in my house. I have asthma and while usually I'm fine, I cannot sit in a damp place with mold growing and not feel the effects of it. That meant an hour commute to work instead of just 15 minutes. After a couple of months, we were finally able to argue both sides and see if I could continue my renovations to my home. So now the HOA on their official complaint was claiming I broke HOA bylaws by not getting their approval, as well as broke rules regarding my home not fitting into the approved style of the neighborhood. I pointed out direct quotes from their own bylaws and state law claiming that in a time of emergency certain rules can be foregone. Those include needing HOA consent for a home altercation, being that there was an important time restriction on the building. Further, there was nothing indicating style of home, only that it followed a certain list of guidelines which my renovation was in full compliance with. I was allowed to start renovation again, but oh no, it doesn't end there. I was also suing them because their delays and actions caused a problem that I was not about to pay for. I hinted before about water damage causing mold if not taken care of in a timely manner. And well, because they halted my legal building process for their fake lawsuit, they caused even more damage to my home. Pausing it meant that the areas that had started renovation had to be torn down and redone from scratch, plus areas that were fine to begin with, but now had the mold spread and the renovation needing to be larger. Not to mention, of course, me not having a home for additional months because of them. I did not even know this until later, but a neighbor saw them go to my home and start tearing down parts of the renovation without any kind of legal consent. This meant that not only was I going to get the renovation I wanted, but they were going to have to pay for it. So while I was at it, I decided to screw trying to keep it as close as possible to please them. I was gonna do whatever the hell I wanted with my renovation because they no longer had a legal leg to stand on. Being found guilty of destruction of private property meant a great payout for me and very little funds left for the HOA to keep themselves afloat. A win-win for me in the end. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it really seems that HOAs love to harass you, especially in times of need. We have had stories in the past of HOAs harassing homeowners after a hurricane or something like that destroyed their home. It really seems like if you live in an HOA neighborhood like this, you just have to pray to God that something like this does not happen to you. Anyway, if you like the HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. And the next one is a revenge story about stealing plane seats. My boyfriend and I live overseas and flew back home to visit our families earlier this month. Since I got more time off work than he did, we flew home separately. My boyfriend found cheap flights on a budget airline with notoriously small seats and little leg room. The flight time back home is almost 8 hours. Boyfriend's flight was not completely full, so at the back of the plane where he was sitting, there was a smattering of free seats. Most people at the back either had an aisle or an empty seat beside them. Unfortunately, my boyfriend was in section of 3 with no free seats. He had the aisle seat with an elderly couple sitting in the middle and window seat. Directly across the line in the middle of the plane, there were 3 free seats. As soon as everyone had boarded the plane, a lady a few rows up called the flight attendant over and complained about how uncomfortable she was and demanded to move into the 3 free seats. The flight attendant told her that no one was allowed to move seats until after the plane had taken off and the seatbelt sign had been switched off. A few minutes after takeoff, when the seatbelt sign was off, my boyfriend figured he would take one of the 3 free seats to give the elderly couple beside him more space to be more comfy on the long flight. He had just unbuckled his seatbelt and started making a move across the aisle when the disgruntled lady a few rows up flung herself into one of the free seats and spread her bags across the other 2, not even waiting to see if anyone else wanted one of the seats, so that she would be on an aisle with a free seat in the middle and someone else on the other aisle. She pulled out nail clippers, clipped her fingernails, and then started painting them. After that was done, she stretched out across the 3 seats and went to sleep. The elderly couple saw this happen and commented on how rude it was that this lady did not give anyone else the chance to take one of the seats, and the 2 of them and my boyfriend discussed her rudeness quietly amongst themselves. A couple of hours later, the flight attendants came down the aisle with hot paninis for lunch. Since Miss Just Got My Nails Done was passed out with her feet sticking out into the aisle, the flight attendants put her panini on the seat back tray instead of waking her up. My boyfriend and the elderly couple shared a knowing look, and then my boyfriend stealthily grabbed the lady's panini off the tray. The 3 of them took her panini out of the plastic wrap and then divided it up amongst themselves. And well guys, that is one way to get revenge on an annoying seat-stealing entitled Karen on a flight. Anyway, the next one is another revenge story. So I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build. The location is kind of strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via a footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand. It's a pain in the rear to manually carry, quite literally, an entire house up this hill. One of our saving graces is having the 2 parking spots on the street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away, and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now, I consider myself a reasonable person, so if somebody is parked in the spots and we don't have a delivery or a need to park the truck, I'll let it go. If we need the spots and there's someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time they do so immediately, until today. I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know that I will meet him at the street and make sure he has space to park. He is carrying all of the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill, so naturally I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazards on for an hour when we have a perfectly good parking spot for him. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice there's a school parent sitting in her car idling. Assuming she's just waiting to pick up her kid, I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she is parked in a no parking zone and we really need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "It will just be a few minutes and your truck is not here. Take a chill pill, dude." Before I can even respond, a giant lumber truck comes around the corner and I wave to him and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She put it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car and I politely ask her again with a stronger tone of voice to move her vehicle, reminding her that she is illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me? Jesus, it's not that hard." I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as closely to her as possible and block her in with the porta potty that is at one end of our reserved spots and the parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because he immediately gets what I'm trying to do and proceeds to expertly block this lady and her car into a little 2 parking spot jail. We unstrap the lumber and my guys begin humping material up the hill. Meanwhile, I call the police parking enforcement to let them know the situation. At this point in time, I wasn't trying to get her in trouble, I just wanted a record of why we were blocking part of the street so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with the situation for me. Wonderful. So then as we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up and wouldn't you know it, mom is just now realizing that the lumber truck is parked so close, she cannot even get out of her driver door to meet her kid. She awkwardly clambers across the inside of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to myself and the driver and states, "I'm in a big hurry, you need to move your damn truck right now so I can go." Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Ma'am, in order to unload the lumber on the truck, we had to unstrap it and per our company policy, I'm not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it. Sorry." This sends her into a near aneurysm levels of blood pressure, meanwhile I can barely contain my laughter. "F your policy, I have somewhere to be," she barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. She does not see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle, I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." With the biggest crap-eating grin I've ever had, I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "F you," she yells and storms back to her car and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point, the officer is walking up to myself and the driver. Before she can even introduce herself, the mom in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over. She then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on the sidewalk. The officer, driver and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go to shock as she realized she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in handcuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit and she is promptly set on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now 2 officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when she first refused to move and that she already knows what's going on. While myself and the driver are giving a report to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal, she was arrested and charged with child endangerment, her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all of that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to actually heed my advice to just pull out around it, but I think next time she will probably think twice about parking in a towaway zone if she ever gets a license again. And wow, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that was one of the most brilliant stories we have ever read. Talk about karma. The next one is a fence neighbor am I the a-hole story. So I used to put up fences for a living. My wife and I, both women, recently bought my aunt and uncle's old home. The house has a large back garden with narrow paths along the sides of the house, and this leads to a front garden that's about 1/3 of the size of the back and is half grass and half paving stones. They have neighbors either side with the same setup. The house is number 85, there is no fence between 85 and 83. House 83 has 3 kids under 10 years old. My back garden has a lot of space to run around, and as there's no fence and my cousins are similar ages to the 83 house's kids, my aunt and uncle often let the 83 house's kids come over and play with my cousins, and the kids have continued to use the garden after my aunt and uncle left. I have nothing against kids, nor does my wife, but we have plans for the back garden. These include putting up a shed, maybe a few flowers, and we are starting the adoption process soon, so we want our kid to have space to play outside. I then went out and measured the property lines a couple of weeks ago, and the husband of 83 came out and asked what I was doing. I explained about the fence and said I would pay for it and put it up myself, told him about my former job doing exactly this, and asked when would be the best for me to do it. He said not to do it at all. I asked why, and he said they have a baby and I cannot be bashing about with hammers and the like. I said I would try to keep it down, but I would still like to do this. He then asked why I needed to do this because things were fine as it is. I said it's nothing personal, but I'm putting up a shed and I just don't want his kids coming onto my property and getting hurt. He then said I cannot put up the shed for the same reason as the fence, and I could see we were not getting anywhere and went back inside. Then Thursday night I'm coming home from work and I see the dad loading bags into their car. Saturday morning and the car is still gone and has not been seen since Thursday. I figure they've gone away for the weekend, and as the issue with me putting up the fence was the noise for the baby, now would be the time to do it. I bought the fence materials that day, I used wooden posts, panels and gravel to hold it in place, and the whole thing was done by Sunday lunch. The fence posts are 1.8 meters and half of that is underground. These things are not moving until the end of time, it's on my property and less than a meter tall, so I did not need permission from the council or 83. They got back Monday night and this morning I've woken up to knocking. The husband wants me to get rid of the fence and says it's an eyesore and he's worried his kids will get injured on it. I tell him it's on my property and it's staying. He says he should have been consulted because it's surrounding his property and his wife hates it and thinks it's really ugly. So legally I'm in the clear. Morally, am I the a-hole? Info, it's a picket fence made of pale wood. It looks clean and polished on both sides, but my side is the one with visible building markers. In other words, there's a nail in my side of the fence. By the way, there's no such issue on his side and I'm open to painting it. Edit, in the nicest, most respectful way possible. I build fences as a routine part of my job nearly every day for the better part of 4 years. And have the qualification specifically in putting up various types of fences. Please stop asking me if the fence looks good or suggesting other ways I could have put the fence up. I know what I'm doing. Comment number 1, not the a-hole, it's your property, you can do whatever you want with it. You were nice and waited until the baby would be gone for the weekend so you didn't disturb anyone. My guess is they've had free reign of both yards and wanted to keep it that way, which is not your problem. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, he clearly felt entitled to your space. You did nothing wrong, but I would expect him to be sulky about it from now on. And here, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for putting up a fence in his own garden on his own property or not? I'm very curious about what you have to say. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.